Welcome to the first event of 2021 of the PRCA's LGBTQ+ group. Happy New Year, and thank you for joining us this afternoon to discuss the topic, does your gender or sexual identity impact how you're treated at work? I'm lucky enough to be joined by 5 incredible panelists with experience and insights both in the PR and communications industry, as well as through their roles as advocates and campaigners for greater inclusivity in the workplace, in particular for the LGBTQ+ community. But before I introduce them, I'd like to give a little background to today's event and subject choice. The PRCA's LGBTQ+ group is partnered with YouGov, and last summer, we together conducted original research into LGBTQ+ inclusivity in the PR and communications workplace. The majority of respondents are PR and comms professionals, 40% of whom were members of the LGBTQ+ community. We'll post a link to the full press release in the comments box, but in short, the findings of the research were that LGBTQ+ inclusivity is improving, but there's still more work to do. The results indicated ongoing discrimination, with 1/5 of LGBTQ+ respondents reporting that they are subject to discrimination at work because of their sexual or gender identity. Alongside the data sat a series of open-end comments in response to the questionnaire. The picture these responses paints of ongoing stigma, disrespect, fear, needing to avoid mentioning being LGBTQ+ in front of clients, bullying, and assumptions or stereotyping is startling. As an ally of the community, I don't want to nurture an industry where we are explicit, implicit, or complicit in our endorsement of discrimination in any of its forms. Exclusive behaviour is not necessarily overtly aggressive. It can be seen in the form of microaggressions, in turning a blind eye, or simply not considering how others are thinking or feeling. One of our panellists, Martin, once said to me that a true ally advocates for those who are not in the room as well as those who are. When there's little personal gain beyond being true to your values, but everything to gain in terms of fostering a better culture and more accessible environment for all. This group campaigns for teams, work, and an industry that are inclusive, embracing our duty to represent everyone as equal as we promote excellence, progress in PR. At the end of this webinar, we encourage all of you to get in touch with ideas of what the PRCA can do to improve LGBTQ+ inclusivity in our workplaces. We're now dropping a contact email address for all thoughts, ideas, or concerns into the comments box. Please talk to us. We want to hear what you have to say. You can also find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'd be glad to hear your input, as I'm sure would today's panelists. It's my belief that we need to work together to make a difference and find solutions to an unacceptable cultural norm. As a symbol of working together, we'd also like to invite one member of the LGBTQ+ community to join me as co-chair of this group, working together to tackle discrimination. If this interests you, or you know someone who would be perfect, please get in touch. I'm now going to introduce the panel. The makeup of this panel is not intended to be representative of all parts of the LGBTQ+ community. They are passionate, engaged, and inspiring individuals, open to sharing their personal experiences and views. Nobody on the panel represents the T in LGBTQ+, but as a group, we are lucky to have transgender friends and allies. One of those, who I count among my personal friends, was the speaker at our first event after I took over as chair. Her name is Charlie Martin. She's a racing driver, nowadays on tracks and sims as we slip in and out of lockdown life. Before the event, I asked her what she thought of the survey results, and we'll end with her words as motivation for the discussion to follow. She said, "Everyone should feel able to be themselves in the workplace. Whether you view that from a holistic aspect or purely in terms of commercial output, the positive outcomes are inescapable. When people feel empowered and supported, everyone benefits." We want this conversation to be as informal as possible, so please do share questions as we go. Start now. And all your thoughts in the Q&A box. We are here to listen. There is a hashtag, PRCA LGBTQ+, and we'll do our best to keep up as we go. For now, though, without further ado, let me introduce you to the panel. And panelists, if you could do me the favor of a little wave when I introduce you, or whatever you feel is more appropriate, that would be fantastic. I'm going to start with Chloe Davies. Chloe is a proud bisexual woman, mother of two, a creative, workplace advocate, chef, and entrepreneur. Her work sees her campaigning for inclusion and equality in social spaces, corporate organizations, and the wider community. Chloe is head of PR and partnerships for My G Work, the global recruitment and networking hub for LGBT+ students, graduates, professionals, and organizations who believe in workplace equality. Chloe volunteers with UK Black Pride as the Executive and Finance Officer, working closely with the Executive Director and the Board of Trustees to help shape the future of UK Black Pride. She is also community lead for the London Queer Fashion Show. She describes herself as a mental health survivor, openly discussing her journey with depression and mental health, and advocates on usualizing these conversations in and outside of the workplace. In all her work around the globe, she aims to further connect those within the community while educating allies to continue disrupting and push for increased visibility, understanding, and appreciation of the communities she works to serve. Next up is Ant Jackson, a senior copywriter at Wunderman Thompson and proud member of the LGBTQ+ community. Most known for writing Lidl's tagline, "Big on quality, little on price," Ant has over 8 years' experience working with some of the world's leading brands, including Airbnb, Bridgestone, the Olympic Games, Sotheby's, and UEFA. With a passion for creating a more diverse world, Ant was 2020 Vice Chair of Miram Roots, the agency's D&I Council, a panelist at Advertising and Black Creators Matter events, and a published writer for Diva magazine, Europe's leading brand for LGBTQI women. In 2017, her Work with Pride campaign for Omnicom's Open Pride Network featured as part of London Pride's parade, and in 2019, she led the brand positioning and copy development to launch the UK's first dedicated LGBTQ+ market research and content creation social enterprise, Queer Voices Heard. Her commitments in this space led to her being recognised as a WACL Future Leader in 2020. She's also an advertising mentor, a member of the Diversity Standards Collective, and of Unite, Wunderman Thompson's LGBTQ+ group. Next, Martin Kmiecic. He's an ambitious multipreneur, activist, and educator working with companies around Europe, Asia, and the Americas on their Inclusion for All strategies. Alongside being CEO of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion consultancy Diversity Pride, Martin delivers executive education programs focused on inclusive leadership and HR strategy in transforming organizations at the London Business School, ESCP Business School, and MIT. He also runs his travel and events company, TravBeat. In 2013, Martin joined the Pride in London Organising Committee's sponsorship and fundraising team. In only 5 years, it tripled its income, making Pride the third largest one-day event in London, drawing in over 1 million people. Martin currently splits his time between London and New York, accelerating his ventures and delivering inclusion programs while an active member of the Institute of Directors, advisor to the USA's National Gay Lesbian Chambers of Commerce, and a mentor to LGBTQ activists. In the past 18 months, Martin has spoken about the importance of inclusion for all at gatherings including Out Leadership Summit in Paris, Out and Equal Summit in Seattle, and D&I Leaders Conference in London. The fourth panelist I would like to introduce is Amelia Stevens. Amelia has been a researcher at YouGov, the PRCA's LGBTQ+ partner, since September 2018, first taking part in the graduate training program and then going on to work full-time in the reputation and B2B research team. She's managed both quantitative and qualitative studies among diverse audiences, providing analytical work and insight for a wide range of clients. In summer 2020, she completed a research study for Facebook looking at, among other things, the subject of brand responsibility in the light of recent socio-political issues, such as the Black Lives Matter protests in the UK and USA. Amelia has also served as co-chair of BU, YouGov's Diversity and Inclusion Network. Since taking on this role, she shifted the focus of the network from a predominantly LGBTQ+ angle to one encompassing all underrepresented and marginalized groups. And last but not least, we have Emma Wright, a Senior Associate Director in H&K's entertainment team. In her career, Emma has presided over some of the world's biggest gaming titles, including Call of Duty, EA Sports FIFA, and The Sims, as well as major global sporting events from the FIFA World Cup to the Olympic Games. Emma currently leads H&K teams for Activision, ESL, Facebook Reality Labs, and Twitch, and provides gaming counsel for Spotify. Previously, Emma led the Adidas football account, which produced the now iconic paper magazine shoot of Leo Messi with a goat. Emma is passionate about social and environmental causes, and in 2017 set up H&K Better Impact to help brands align to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. She's part of H&K's Equal Leadership Group, creating a louder culture for diversity and inclusivity at the agency. Out of work, Emma is co-chair of Proud and Palace, the official LGBT plus fan group of Crystal Palace Football Club, and has worked extensively with the club, Kick It Out, and other organisations to improve the experience of LGBT plus fans in football. So, without further ado, everybody has heard enough from me, I think, probably for a lifetime, let alone one panel. So my first question, handing over, and I'm going to start with Chloe, is what is your personal response to the proposition and why? Do you think that gender and sexual identity have an impact on how you have been treated in the workplace and how you've observed others being treated?
Okay, so I don't want to take up the time for everyone else, because how long do you have to answer a question? I guess I'll start off first and foremost. Before my gender or my identity, I'm a Black woman. So I think that when we talk about how does your identity define who you are, I think unfortunately the reality in my case is what I look like has been predisposed by society. So before I can even show my identity, actually we have a preconceived notion, as the entire world saw, in the height of 2020 last year for Black Lives Matter, our Black and brown bodies aren't necessarily viewed in the same light. When I was thinking about this, I actually thought, where did I start? My mum works at Peace Jones in Sloane Square, and at 16 and four days old, when you were legally allowed to work, she said, I stopped your pocket money, you start on Saturday, don't embarrass me. And so when I joined there on my induction, 1999, it's a long time ago, the first day they said 1 in 2 men here are gay. So if this is something you're not comfortable with, this isn't the place for you to work. And I've been out since I was 15. So at 16, it was amazing to actually go and work somewhere where they were so open about being LGBT. And so it was more about the barriers I faced in the workplace, were more about being female and being Black than they were about being LGBT. But I think when we think of the many layers of our identity, they always have an impact, because it's how other people view you, not necessarily how you view yourself. I think I'm amazing. And that's not, you have to be your own support, and you have to toot your own horn. So I know that as long as I put my mind to it, I'm very good at what I do, but the rest of the world has an opinion on how good they think that is. And I think that's the barriers that we're all trying to change, and the different things that we are doing, the different work that we're doing to change other people's opinion based on what we can see or what we can't.
And it's interesting because you say about all of us, basically needing to have our own backs and advocate for ourselves, but there's also this really important role of allies that was kind of central to your bio. And I know you and I have spoken before about the fact that Martin, who I'm going to hand to now, has been an ally in all kinds of guises to both of us.
Absolutely.
So Martin, I'm interested to know what your experience is, and if it's similar to Chloe's or very different.
I'm trying to unmute myself. Welcome to the virtual world. The experiences when it comes to gender identity and perhaps the visual identity that you put out there, yes, a lot of experiences are great. And I love how London, for example, as a bubble allowed us to be ourselves. But as you already mentioned, with the intro, I travel quite a lot. I'm currently in a country where, for example, me wearing my London clothing wouldn't be necessarily appropriate. And that is in PR, that is in marketing, in any business simply environment that I am joining. Every single time I need to question whether I should reveal my gender, gender identity first of all. Like, yes, I identify as a male, but then there is, with the LGBTQ layer on it, automatically people do judge you. And I remember even, just over a week ago, I was sitting at a table, lovely dinner with people who I barely knew because they came into the islands as well, clients, and then suddenly, they asking me about my partner, and I'm like, should I say that I have a husband, or should I just say that I have a partner? You question that because you never know what the reaction can be. So there are mix of really great things like Chloe said. Some of the environments are extremely friendly, but some others, and in general, unfortunately, the PR marketing world is yet to accept a lot, and to kind of to get us to the level where, me wearing, for example, an earring, is not going to be suddenly a huge controversy, or even men wearing dresses, that's not going to be a problem when they go to events as well. So there's quite a lot that we need to do. Again, my experiences are very mixed on this one, but yes, I do try to be an ally to to whoever walks into the room. Let's have a blank page on everyone who walks in, rather than go with our biases and judge the book by the cover. We shouldn't necessarily be doing this. A lot of people still go with the biases. I try to not to, and I will point out if someone will do it. I'll be like, no, there's stick and stones, they stay behind us. We come into 2021, and that's the new world. So new abnormal.
And tying together what you kind of touched on, Martin, and also what Chloe mentioned, one of the interesting things about diversity is that there are some areas of diversity that are visible, and therefore, whether we want to or not, we automatically become part of a conversation, and that will automatically lead to people's reactions to us in some ways. There are other areas of diversity which are invisible. And one of the things that you mentioned about, do I say that I have a husband, or do I just say I have a partner and then I leave it neutral? It's not untrue, but it's for sure uncontroversial, but maybe you wanted to say husband. In the research, we found that a number of people from the LGBTQ plus community were saying that in the position of being on agency side, you're actually not just thinking about, do I feel comfortable saying this? What would this person think? But you actually have the agency client dynamic to take into account as well. And the fact that you're trying to win work and business. And Emma, I think you probably know that I'm going to come to you. And I also saw you nodding because you worked in client services for some time. What is your experience of that?
Yeah, I think, the added complication is, and Martin's touched on this, like we're all working in a very borderless and international way now. So, sometimes we have clients in countries where, culturally they're in a very different place in the journey of LGBT plus inclusion than we are, and legally they're in different places as well. And you have to be a bit of a chameleon to that. And I think, I've had mixed experiences, as I think everyone on this panel has, with I've had employers who kind of wanted and pressured me into presenting more female for client meetings in terms of my dress code and things. And I will always be happiest in jeans and trainers, and that's not necessarily how I feel most comfortable and how you're going to get the most out of me in a work environment if I'm not feeling comfortable as my most authentic self. And then and another way, the uncomfortable truth, which I'm trying to get more comfortable saying, is that there's been occasions where it's probably been a benefit to me because I've worked in sports for so long, and I walk into football environments, and while I have female colleagues and former colleagues who have had, oh, so do you actually like football then? Do you actually support, do you have a team? Do you go to games? Whereas I really vividly remember the moment I got asked, oh, so do you go to away games as well? And I was like, oh, I'm a bit more into the center of their club here. Like, you're asking, I've got a season ticket, but you want to know if I'm on this level of going to away games. So I think, as agency people, there's that very difficult dynamic of being a chameleon to your clients and understanding that some clients are going to be more corporate and some clients are going to be more relaxed, and flexing yourself to that, and being authentic to yourself and being true to yourself and being able to come home and say, you know, I felt comfortable today, I didn't feel, and there's a difference between all of this with privacy and secrecy. So some things I will just keep private because they're my business, that's my private life, it doesn't need to come into the workplace. But if it tips into feeling like it has to be secrecy and you have to actively hide something, that's when I think you start to feel that internal conflict and that that uncomfortable feeling of I've had to actively hide something about myself. It's not that I just didn't want to say, I've had to, you know, lie or change things. So yeah, I think that that's the constant battle with being in a client-facing role, and again, in agency side, it's not just clients, it's suppliers, it's the hundreds of different people that you speak to every single week, month, that you have to constantly ask yourself, well, how much of myself do I put into this on a professional level and on a personal level, which is a real balancing act for all of us, I think.
And can I just ask everybody, like, and actually the audience as well, please feel free to comment on this, but maybe everybody can like nod or vigorously shake their head or remain completely neutral. Do you feel that you are able to share as much of yourself as you would like to in terms of the invisible areas of diversity in terms of who you are when you're at work? Oh, we've got, I think that there's also a bit of a generational divide there as well, which is really interesting. And it would be, you know, you see this a lot in data about how younger generations find that they feel more comfortable and more able to be themselves than those who've been in the workplace for longer. Anyway, I'm going to come to you, Ant, because I want to pick up on the agency client dynamic and the ironic tension in the fact that actually it's kind of well recognized, and Charlie touched on it in her quote that she submitted beforehand, that diverse teams are more creative and deliver better commercial results. And yet you may have a client who is happy with that kind of in the back office, but doesn't necessarily want that represented in the front office, in the team that's delivered to them. As a creative, what is your experience?
I think I'm very lucky to work with a really diverse bunch of people, first of all, and you made a really good point about age, I think, because thinking about my own experiences, I feel quite lucky, I suppose, that I've been in the industry for less than 10 years and my experiences are very different to how I'd imagine Chloe's experiences would have been. It's like we've gone from being in the 90s to people asking anyone who joins the company, are you okay with working with LGBT people, to YouGov commissioning a survey asking LGBT people if they're okay in the workplace. So that's really positive to see. But I really feel that unless everyone can be their most authentic self at work and show their own perspectives and their own stories, we're going to keep making the same stuff and we're going to keep coming up with the same ideas, really. And this is why I think, especially in advertising at the moment and in most forms of marketing, things kind of feel like they've kind of run a bit dry. And it's probably because even though you've got the creative teams who may be much more diverse and there might be many different perspectives, which is brilliant, the further up you get and every single person that you need to get approval from, all of a sudden that diversity filter gets kind of narrower and narrower, and you end up basically speaking to majority sort of white cis straight males again.
And Amelia, I haven't forgotten you. I know you're there, but there is a reason that I came to you last, because you not only have your own experience, which I would love to hear about, particularly as a member of Gen Z and seeing like how things are changing, but also you have really been at the helm of not only releasing this data, but analyzing the data and seeing what everybody else had to say. So I was interested in both what you saw kind of from your professional research position and also what you experience day to day.
Sure. So I'll put my data hat on first and read you a little statistic to start with, and then we can go into the boring stuff like my experience. So we asked people to rate themselves on a scale, an agreement scale, to the statement, as an LGBTQ person, I feel comfortable referencing my sexuality, gender identity at work. Of the people that agreed with that, it was 70%, a good majority, not everyone unfortunately, but a good majority. And then we had 19% who either disagreed or strongly disagreed with that. And if I'm remembering correctly, that's the same proportion of people who have faced outward discrimination in the workplace. That is very sad to me. I think that is a pretty high proportion. You know, that would be, if we're looking at that as 1 in 5 people, that's, you know, that's one person on this panel, more than that. In terms of my own experience, something that I've found very true throughout my career is that having allies of any sort is really important. And that's just not at the face value of that statement, but in terms of having close friends that you work with. I think being open is very important. If I have a friend or a colleague who's telling me about, you know, for example, a heterosexual man who's telling me about his wife and his children, great. I think there's an onus on me to be open back with him if I feel safe to do so, and tell him about my boyfriend, my girlfriend, whatever it might be at that moment, you know, if and where I feel it's okay to do so. In terms of negative experiences, you know, not really. I mean, I was at a pitch once with my old manager, who is a married woman, married to a woman, and it was a pitch for a project about diversity and inclusion, and it was about, you know, can we speak to people of color, people with disabilities, people, you know, of different gender and sexual identities. And when we arrived, they said, we're actually really disappointed you didn't turn up with a more diverse group of people. And I remember thinking, ouch. And I remember my manager going, well, I'm married to a woman. I was like, yes, I'm so proud of you. So yeah, I think that's about the size of it.
No, it's really interesting hearing different perspectives. And before we move on to the next question for the panel, we've actually had a few things in from the audience. So I'm just going to read a few of those out. So Marcus has said, I tried to do this. So this was when I was saying, you know, do people feel that you can be open at work? I tried to do this in order to be as authentic as possible. It's hard at times though. Agree with Emma's flex comments. So there you go, Emma, somebody who's had a similar experience to you. And then Antonia has said, my own personal experience, another Antonia, who thought we were going to get two, my own personal experience is that I've never felt more comfortable with being my true and authentic self as a lesbian working within PR and communications than any other environment. This is one thing that's kept me in this industry so long. It certainly feels for me that PR, comms, and creative tend to attract more creative alternative types, certainly in London, or maybe I have a skewed view. Would be good to hear more from the findings of the research to reset my own potential bias. I'd be interested to know different perspectives. Does anybody have a different perspective to Antonia's experience? Has anybody experienced the contrary, where our industry has been actively exclusive?
I wouldn't say it's exclusive, but I think that I think you get to a point where we have to be careful, and I think that's now why EDI and D&I and diversity is a key. And I guess now we talk about intersectionality, but not sometimes in the right context, is that so we don't become tokenistic. We have this idea of, you know, diversity means, okay, well, you know, we can talk about lesbians and, you know, we can talk about bisexual, but when we talk about bisexual, you know, the bisexual woman is always like, you know, incredibly good looking, and there's not the other dynamics of who we really look like within the community. They're just the stereotypes of, you know, what we look like in film or what we look like on print. And so I think that to a certain extent, we err on that dangerous side every now and again of the stereotype of what we think the community should look like. And that's, you know, someone comes in, a client comes in and go, we want this, and you're like, that's not really what it looks like can we try and work on that? So I think that's the part where we're in now, is kind of to try and undo that work, because I think that, yeah, you can absolutely be free, and I totally agree. I think is it Dan that said, you know, it's being in this space where actually, you know, you can flex. And then, you know, the other lady that said, but it's one of the most welcoming spaces. Absolutely, I found so many of my own community within PR and creative, but are we all reflected in what we really look like? I think we're a very long way to go from kind of that part. And I think that's the part of, you know, utilizing is a strong word, but just utilizing all of our existences in the mainstream in so many different ways.
Yeah, and actually to pick up on that, Daniel Zed has said, I feel like I can be fully open at work, but that's only because I'm working for an LGBTQ organization now. When I was working previously in a PR agency and we'd have a client meeting, I'd be told to dress in a certain way, essentially not to put on anything that attracts attention. Now, one of the topics we wanted to cover today, I think this is a kind of great segue into about kind of microaggressions, because it's really easy to focus on two groups of people, those who are being discriminated against and those who are actively discriminating. They are intolerant and they feel intolerant, and sometimes they're even quite proud about the fact that they're intolerant. But there are actually other groups. There are groups of people who unintentionally discriminate, and there are groups of people who don't discriminate, but they are just bystanders who let it go when they see discrimination. And in many ways, these groups can be as powerful to convert or engage with as those who are kind of actively intolerant. And of course, we want to have conversations with them as well about what might be driving that. But I'm interested to know kind of what your experiences are, and also if people have examples of microaggressions, because I know, even in my life, I have heard, I would like to think I haven't said things, but I've certainly heard things where I wouldn't necessarily have registered they're a microaggression, because I've put this layer over the top of, oh, but that wasn't how it was intended. So what do you guys think? Who wants to volunteer? I'm looking for a willing look. Emma looks like,
in a very tech-savvy way, use the raise hand function. So not my first Zoom call, everybody. This is something actually that we've dealt with a lot with Proud and Palace and the work we do at the football club, because one of the big, I guess, things that we have is you've got in any football stadium where people are boiling over, and football as match going fans, it still attracts a certain demographic. We've had issues at Crystal Palace for a long time that our main rivals are Brighton, and Brighton as a place is known for its high LGBT plus community and Brighton Pride and all of this. So for a long time, the rivalry spilled into homophobic chants and stereotypes and all of this. So we one of our big things that we wanted to do was give other fans, and that included fan groups and podcasts and all of this, the language for how to challenge someone if they're stood next to you at the game and they say something that you're not comfortable with, and to normalize that challenging. And we worked with over 40 different fan groups for Crystal Palace and had this campaign called There's 99 Reasons to Hate Brighton, Homophobia Doesn't Need to Be One of Them. We had this really fun thing on Twitter, which was like, right, let's try and come up with all the other reasons that there are that we don't like Brighton as a football club. It's their terrible kits and their terrible stadium and all of this. And what we really found is that it made, especially on social media, because we created this JPEG that people could use. You could tell when you get PR people working in activism, all gets very creative and over the top. But we had this JPEG that people could use on Twitter to challenge people and say, this isn't all right. And it's not just Proud and Palace saying it. It's 5-year plan fanzine and HRTCO and all of these other people, and fan groups everywhere from Dubai to Sydney to San Francisco all had their names on this thing. And it just became this really powerful way of enabling football fans to turn to the person next to them at Selhurst Park in the middle of a game and go, no, that chant's not all right anymore, and then move on, and then we can all get back to the game and watching Palace lose, which is what we do best. But it's a really difficult thing, and I've tried to stop using this quote because of the problems with the author, but I still find it so relevant to this, which is a line from Harry Potter where Dumbledore says, it's a brave thing to stand up to your enemies, but it's a far braver thing to stand up to your friends. So to turn around to your colleague, your teammate, the person that you've sat next to at a football stadium for 10, 15 years and say, that's not all right, is such a difficult and brave thing to do. And then you add in all the dynamics of your workplace, and it might be someone more senior than you. I've seen in the Q&A someone saying about how you challenge a client if they say the wrong thing without there being professional repercussions. And I feel a lot for bystanders, because they see and hear a lot of things, and then it's a really difficult and brave thing to challenge. So I think the role that allies play in all of this can't be underestimated, and you know, their bravery when they do step up and say something is how we'll progress in a meaningful way, I think.
It's funny actually that you ended with allies, Emma, because I was going to say I've witnessed members of many different underrepresented groups, but you know, we're talking specifically about the LGBTQ plus group today, kind of speak up in their defense, and it's bizarrely seen as more antagonistic than when an ally does it. And the number of times that I've just been able to basically say, you know, that's not okay, when somebody said something and it just lands and they actually address it. Whereas they see that there's this odd confrontation if somebody who's actually defending themselves makes the point. And to that point, we've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to address the first one to Ant. So it's from Sean Carroll, and he says, how do you think agencies can combat client-side prejudice without losing business and allowing employees to be themselves? Is it possible?
I think for me, that starts with your values. And I think one of the sort of key parts of sort of having relationships with your clients is being clear with them at the start of that relationship and going, okay, this is what we're all about, and this is what we stand for, and this is what we live by, and this is what we want to show in our work. And if they're on board with that, which I mean, they should be, then I think you're sort of laying out the foundations fairly early on. So like, for example, where I am at Wunderman Thompson at the moment, we're looking at, we've got our diversity groups, we've got our LGBT group, and we're looking at sort of how can our values from sort of the top down, our agency values, marry up with our values within that within those individual groups. And that's what we need everyone to live by. So going into every single meeting, it's how do we put a diversity lens on this work? When we're looking at the creative brief, what audiences are we speaking to? We're probably not speaking to an ABC1 demographic of Gemma, who's 35 years old and she's got 2 kids. It's probably a lot more diverse than that. So where are these opportunities? We need to be, I keep jumping around. We need to be shaping culture as much as we are representing it. And I think within PR and marketing and advertising, we've got a real opportunity to do that. And really, when we're looking at LGBT in particular, when you're talking about something like the Pink Pound, especially with the younger generation, there's a high percentage of people who identify as something other than heterosexual. So it's a growing, we call it a minority at the moment, but I don't think it necessarily will be with the way we're now looking at gender and sexuality. So really, if you want to survive in the next 50 years' time, you need to be thinking about diversity as one of your business strategies and objectives.
And part of it as well is that path to usualization, as Chloe says, but through multiple different touch points. Through the work that we do, as Ant's been speaking about, through how we engage in the workplace, through how allies stand alongside members of underrepresented groups, whatever group that may be. And as I mentioned in the introduction, you know, as Martin said, advocating for people when they're not in the room, because that's incredibly powerful. And I'm going to come to you, Martin, actually, with the next question, which is from Alfred Slade. He says, in the event that a key client makes an offensive or bigoted remark, how should we balance the need to challenge this behavior with the risk of personal or professional blowback? And I feel like you would be a very measured person in giving advice on this question.
Well, I'm not sure if I can be measured on this one. The companies and the organizations I work with, including, let's say, London Business School, for example, I know I go in front of people that come from so many different walks of life, from so many different parts of the world. And we have a lot of people specifically coming to listen to what we say from Middle East. Now, me as a gay man, you know, I do not necessarily should be saying about my sexuality in front of people, especially when we talk about, well, let's say leadership to people from Middle East. But I very early in a stage when I was joining the organization, and I'm not talking only about the LBS, but also other ones too, I said, look, I will never hide my sexuality if that is going to be something beneficial for me to say during my lecture, I will say it out loud and I will never be afraid. Now, question mark, how do you do it? You just do it naturally. I always say, point out when there is a problem with the client. Just don't be, oh my gosh, this is really wrong thing to say, because yes, you can lose the business. Unfortunately, you can have someone on the other side who is going to be offended by you even pointing this out. But what is very important is to take time and educate someone why perhaps it's not okay, first of all. If it's a client, say, look, as a company, and again, the company that you work for hopefully is going to be behind you on this one. We'll simply say, look, we support you, and if the client is going to go, then the client is going to go. And you need to simply be strict with certain things, but they also have definitely a backing with with the company that you work for. If the company believe in equality, they support LGBTQ community, and then, again, looking at the very much intersectional levels as well, then make sure that the client that you approach is simply gonna sign up to the terms and conditions too. We need to create the world, that is going to be better, not only for us, but for people that will come after us. I always say, and I know, our conversations with Katie as well, like, PRCA, for example, they do, as an organization, I would say you have a duty to start hashing this out, to say to all your agencies, look, these are the guidelines that we should follow, because this is something that we believe is good for not only the specifically commercial benefits for the company, but also for your people that work with you, which should be the most important, obviously, part. And I've had situations in the past where I did refuse to service individuals or organizations that simply did not want to sign up to the very basic terms and conditions, non-discriminatory terms and conditions, which again is a standard thing. If you will not appreciate the person that comes in, whether they then identify as an LGBTQ or not, I want you to treat them as a human being. This is workplace. You want to come in, let's do the business. We can make the world a good place if we will not be as judgmental. Pointing out is very important. It's a difficult thing to do, but very important thing to do. Yes, like Katie, you pointed out as well, is stand up for the people that are not in the room. We need to remember about those who are not present in the room. Not every single meeting that you have with the client is going to be attended by person of color, person with disability, person, a woman or non-binary person, trans person, LGBTQ, whoever you are from the community. Not always is all going to be there. So please do always look out for each other, and they will look out for you too. That's something that I've learned in the past decade, over a decade in the field. People do come and support me that way too, because I stood up for them when they were not in the room. So do the same. You will not lose the client. If you lose, that's they lost. You will get, and as an agency in 2021 and beyond, as Ant already said, if you do want to survive in the next 20, 30, 50 years, your client needs to be up to date. If they are not, I will tell you, you find more people who will just pay even extra money for your services, because there are people who are willing to spend money with inclusive organizations and agencies. So don't be afraid to lose the client. If you do that, wave goodbye. Just wave goodbye and simply go to the next one. Yeah.
I think it's really important, this idea of your employer being an ally, as well as individuals who, in your personal or professional life being allies, and that kind of responsibility. Now, I want to come to you, Amelia, to talk about the ways we go about behavior change. But first of all, I just want to say I'm actually very excited by the amount of interaction we're getting in the chat and the Q&A, but putting that to one side, I wanted to say that Sean, who asked the question that I put to Ant, has replied saying, can definitely relate with the pressure of having to act and dress a certain way to make sure you fit in with everyone else in the meeting, especially within corporate PR, which just seems so old-fashioned and outdated. And then Joe, and I think Chloe, you've got something to say about this, said, just to share an experience that contributed to me leaving a previous role. I was once in a conversation with a high-paying client who referred to Nancy boys to describe the competition. I was told to brush it off and toughen up by my former line manager. They pay the bills, was the response. He meant nothing by it. Chloe, what have you got to say?
Yeah, he didn't not mean anything by it. I've learned in 2021 to be unapologetically who I am. And I think it's like Martin said, it's like Ant was saying, your organization now, integrity is everything. And your own personal integrity has also got to be the strongest backbone. You really have to know how much of yourself you're going to give an organization, but also the expectation of how much they should give you. And if they are not prepared to show up for you, that is incredibly bad behavior. So well done for leaving, but that should also be the benchmark of how I never want to be treated again by an organization. And so when we think about, what to do if a client says the wrong thing, when Katie talked about microaggressions, the one I hate the most, that I always often get on a experience like this, well, Chloe, you speak so well. Like, how am I supposed to speak? Versus they might say to Amelia or Katie, Anne or Emma, oh my God, you were fantastic. But Chloe, you spoke so well. Because the idea of what I look like and what I sound like and the stereotype of who Black women should be isn't necessarily my voice. So whether we are LGBTQIA plus or whoever within the spectrum, whether we're Black, white, Chinese or whoever, it's about how we represent ourselves. And that as an industry, it's about, like Martin said, if the space is not there, then we create the space and we bring that person into the room. So, when we're pitching, how often I've been on a pitch call and someone said, Chloe, what do you think about the Black community? And I'm like, I am not the voice for all the Black community, just like, Emma, what about, football? And I'm like, well, I like football too, but, again, not on that scale. Emma, what do you think about rugby? And it's like, no, I said football. I didn't necessarily say rugby. It's this idea of what we might do, but being able to just, hold your ground and actually say, no, that's not how it's going to work. And especially having, the moral compass of these are our diversity standards within our organization. This is our ethos. This is what we believe. And this is what we will not work with. Because we all remember the PR nightmares of 2020, and there were quite some big ones. So I think in 2021, we're not going to get away with we're still working on that. If you're at the beginning of your journey, cool, but you need to be on the journey now. We're not going to have the option of not doing that anymore.
And there's this point as well about putting yourself in other people's shoes and not simply thinking, oh, well, I'm not part of that community, so that's not my problem. And it's really interesting, actually, because, Joe, you shared that example and I read it. I've had exactly the same experience with sexual harassment. Identical. Yeah, but he's from a prospective client. So you can literally tell him not to do what he's doing, but don't complain about him because then the new business would go away. Anyway, Amelia, what I would like to talk about is this issue of judgment. So obviously, there are many people, probably on this call and outside of this call, who feel judged by those who discriminate, either knowingly or unintentionally. But equally, there's this point about human behavior. And I ask you because you kind of interact with human behavior and how we respond to things all day, every day, whereby if we call out that behavior in certain ways, people may reflect and change their opinions. I mean, if we're lucky, they may even over time like shift their values. But if we call it out in another way, they may actually dig in and go into sort of fixed mindset rather than growth mindset and become more entrenched in their original position because they feel backed into a corner. Do you have any kind of experience or advice on how you would suggest navigating that?
Oh, where to start? I think there could be a place for humour in correcting, if we can use that word, behaviours from people that you think are inappropriate. I think there can be a place for explanations. And I thought it was quite interesting what we were saying earlier about how it can be almost that the LGBTQ plus person ends up looking like the aggressor if they call out behaviour. And I think that's because I'm pleased to say I've not experienced it in my current workplace, but I think it's the case that if I'm having a conversation with someone and they say something homophobic, biphobic, anything like that, and they're talking about a gay person who's over there and not involved in the conversation, it doesn't touch them. They're not necessarily going to be held accountable. Whereas if they've offended Amelia, the person standing in front of them, it immediately becomes something more tangible. So I used to work in a sunbed shop in Southeast London. So I've definitely had experience as a kind of hormonal 17-year-old aggressively outing myself to my customers who were like, oh, you know, saying this and that and the other kind of homophobic things, which we got a lot. And as I say, I think there's a place for humor, but I was also having a conversation with a friend the other day about those kind of hideous videos that were all over social media a couple of years back of white men harassing Islamic women on public transport. And I think everyone watches that and goes, I wouldn't let that happen. I would not let that happen. But I think in a workplace, it can be a lot more difficult because you can't stand up, call them all the names under the sun and get, you know, it's different. It's the workplace. There's an expectation of being professional. And I think you would hope that in 2021, it wasn't like the people on the public transport. It was just the kind of, as we say, the jokes and the microaggressions. But as I say, I think there's a place for humor in calling people out. I think you can say, you just say to them, that's not right. And do you know why that's not right? Do you need me to explain to you? Or even just saying to them, tell me why that's funny. Tell me why that joke you're making is funny and tell me why it's not offensive.
Absolutely. And did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Amelia's made a really good point on humour. It breaks down barriers. And I think when it comes to judging people, breaking down barriers is one of the most important things you can do, because humour is a difficult one. Sometimes it's like, for example, I've made jokes about myself and being a bisexual woman, and it's funny because I say it, but it's not funny if it's someone who I haven't met before who says it in a new meeting room, and I'm around a table of strangers. So it's, some people will feel very uncomfortable with humour, and it can easily sort of go into the world of becoming a microaggression, and someone can sort of brush it off and say, oh, well, I was only joking. They might not find it funny. So I think breaking down barriers and using humour can be great, but in a safe space. So for example, something that we did last year was we held an event that was called Ask a Queer Person Anything. And it addressed the elephant in the room head on. And it went, you know, you've all got these questions. Like when we're talking about microaggressions, I've been asked things like, oh, who's the man? Or how does it work? Or something like that. But it's a space that actually everyone who signs up to it can go, yeah, I'm here because I want to know this, and I don't quite know how to go about asking that. That people are so scared of saying the wrong thing, especially when it comes to LGBTQ. It's always changing. No one knows everything. We're all still educating ourselves. So just sort of having a safe space to go, right, let's be out in the open about this, and let's be brave. Let's ask those questions, but with people who are comfortable to be there to answer them, not just going up to the first sort of LGBT person you can see in the office and stopping them when they're off guard.
So we've only got 6 minutes left, and I actually think the conversation's flowing pretty well, and we probably could all stay here for at least another hour. So what I want to say is, we're not going to dig too much into exactly what the PRCA should do right now, because what I think would be fantastic would be using the email address that we've posted twice now in the chat. If people get in touch afterwards with all their ideas, and don't forget as well, if you've got nominees for my co-chair, somebody from the LGBTQ plus community, please do send those over as well. Then that would be great. But what we are going to do is we've got one more question in the Q&A, and also interestingly, kind of counterpoint to Amelia and Ant's discussion about humour. Marcus has said, I corrected a client who simply assumed I had a wife by using humour and feel like he came out looking victimised. Even after I said I wasn't offended, I just wanted to clarify. Awkward on a Zoom call, but we've moved on past it, fine. So, you know, I think we all are aware it's a very sensitive area to navigate, but one of the ways in which we can navigate it is by learning from one another's experience and sharing those. And I hope, as well as getting in touch with Kiri using the email address provided, I'll say it one more time in the chat before Zoom ends and then it goes away and disappears forever. Certainly from my perspective, and I think speak on behalf of everybody on the panel today, like, do reach out through social media if you'd like to as well. Very happy to continue this conversation beyond this webinar. But before we wrap, we've got one other question in the Q&A, so I'm going to read it out and let's see what we've got to say. It's from an anonymous attendee. I feel like LGBTQ diversity issues have been slightly sidelined by Black Lives Matter and the emphasis on that movement, which feels to some extent like it's become the workplace DEI issue du jour, which I'm not arguing with. It is deserving of a lot of attention. But how do we make sure that all voices, communities, groups, etc., remain part of the diversity conversation? I'm in HR, and I feel that to some extent, if I recruited an LGBTQ new hire, that would be certainly welcome, but it wouldn't be viewed as favourably as if it was an LGBTQ and Black new hire. So honestly, who would like to answer this question? Chloe's come off mute. If anybody else would like to.
You can't talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about Black LGBTQ plus lives. So if you're catching up now, I'm sorry. But the reality is we have talked about LGBTQ plus lives for 51 years openly in the workspace. And yes, there's an incredible amount of work to be done, but from a HR professional, can you say you've done the same for Black lives? And so whether you have to do that for a quota or not, the fact that you'll be giving LGBTQ plus people, regardless of how they identify via race, the same shot, the same standard, the same chance. If you can succinctly say, yes, you can answer that question, then you might be the exception to the vast reality that we saw play out around the globe all the way through 2020. And so I'm sorry that you feel that way, but unfortunately, as a Black person that doesn't see themselves utilized in society in the same way that my white counterparts do, I would welcome the fact that the rest of the world is waking up and saying we want to share space with not only Black people, but people of South Asian descent, that we're giving more space to people of Asian and Oriental descent in ways that we've never done that, but we're actually going to do that responsibly, because this is true allyship. We've been fighting this battle for women for 101 years and we still haven't got it right. We're fighting this battle for LGBTQ plus people for 51 years and we're still not getting it right. And really, this is the second time in 10 years that Black Lives Matter has ignited and we didn't get it right the first time. So if we're truly starting to get it right now, and that's uncomfortable, welcome to being uncomfortable. We're all uncomfortable right now, but only from that place of uncomfortability is where we get true change. So yeah, I'm not going to apologize for not giving a possibly nice response because it's uncomfortable for everyone, but this is where we do the work. And, you know, Katie, you talked about what does allyship mean? I would hope I am an ally to everyone within my fellow LGBTQ community and beyond. I didn't get to where I am today on my own, and I hope to help everybody else that I possibly can. That is true allyship. So you don't lose by uplifting another characteristic. I would hope, you know, I'm trying to drag parents into everything I can do because it's, you know, for me, it's in real time what's most important, but that's how we win. That's how we collectively win as a society. So, you know, Emma, as a fellow football fan, I'm an Arsenal fan, don't hate me, but we can talk football. You know, I can bring you into spaces, and that's what you're supposed to do. Pay it forward, share the opportunities. So, you know, I'm happy if Anonymous would like to get in touch. I'm on LinkedIn, but it's how we win for everyone. We have to.
I would also like to suggest that maybe rather than one underrepresented group having too much attention, the issue is that the other group deserves an equal amount of attention. So if the issue is that in your workplace, people are now paying attention to racial equality, but they're not paying attention to sexual or gender identity equality, then maybe that needs to be elevated rather than kind of slightly putting to one side the other issue. And you know, I think the point of inclusivity is not that it's inclusivity for one group or inclusivity for one group at the expense of other groups. It's inclusivity for everyone. And I've sat in a room before where I've had a friend who is a straight white male, and people have made disparaging comments on him, and I know a lot about his background and they don't, with all kinds of assumptions of the privilege he must have had that he definitely did not have. And I've advocated on his behalf, because inclusivity is inclusivity, and not making assumptions about people and not stereotyping and giving everybody space to breathe and be themselves. So It's 6 o'clock, which means we have to say goodbye. But I really appreciate all of your comments. There's lots of enthusiastic things coming in through the chat and everybody interacting. There are lots of ways to get in touch. If you can't find us by any other means, please, I have a very unusual name. You can find me on any social media, send a message saying it's impossible to get in touch, but I really want to be part of this conversation. We will all continue to be part of it. Obviously, Amelia represents our partners, YouGov, so they definitely will be working hand in hand with us. There are more events coming up. Thank you as well to the PRCA for helping to coordinate this. I hope you have a lovely evening. Keep sticking up for one another and stay strong. Good night.